Hello, everyone. We're just trying to get a name for a phone number ending in 647. If you could please identify yourself.
Frank Desmond, Precinct 5.
Thank you. And one more number ending in 000. If you could please identify yourself.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, the phone number ending in 000. If you could please identify yourself.
Sean Fallon, Precinct 6.
Thank you.
Good evening, folks. It's Tuesday, June 7, 7:30 p.m. I call annual town meeting back into order. First thing I'd like to do is recognize Miss Linda Lee Sheridan, who has a brief announcement about an upcoming event in Milden. Miss Linda Lee Sheridan, if you are out there, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Linda Lee Sheridan, town meeting member from Precinct 9. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me the time to speak. I'm here this evening to remind you all that Milton Music Fest and Fireworks will be back again Saturday, June 25th, with Celtic Sunday on June 26 on Hutchinson Field, across from the Forbes House and overlooking the Boston skyline. Festivities will begin at 5 p.m. on Saturday, and we will again have a huge sandbox and the ever-popular giant water slide for children of all ages, and bouncy house for smaller children. Cornhole was a big draw last year for families, and the Fruit Center truck will be on hand with goodies and a small slide for little ones. And children should be on the lookout for your favorite characters as they roam the field posing for pictures. Music will kick off at 6:30 with Pauline Wells and her all-female band, followed by the popular dance band Booty Vortex from 8 to 9:30. The evening's festivities will conclude with perhaps the most spectacular fireworks you have ever seen. Last year, we drew our biggest crowd yet, with thousands present for the spectacular display. Celtic Sunday begins at noon on June 26 with many familiar and beloved Irish bands: Fenian's Son, Aaron's Melody, Sean and Carolyn Brennan and the Skiffs, Currig's Fancy, and new this year, the Strawberry Hill Band. The headliner will be Celtic Cross from New York City. And again, new this year, we will welcome a tiny little Irish pub. We'll also have a trad tent where you can enjoy traditional Irish music in a smaller setting and perhaps even join in. This annual memory-creating event wouldn't be possible without our major sponsor, the Copeland Family Foundation, and the many town departments who assist in countless ways. Free parking is available both days at LaSalle and Fontbonne, with shuttle buses bringing you to the field. Food trucks and beer and wine truck will be on site both days, so no outside beverages, adult beverages are permitted on the field. As you can tell, this is an action-packed weekend we have planned. However, we are a small group of only 6 volunteers coordinating this event. This year, we're asking for some volunteers to help. We're in the process of creating an online sign-up on our website for opportunities to help, and it should be up and running by tomorrow. We will have jobs involved with setting up the field and activities on Friday and Saturday, and breaking down everything on Monday morning. We also have the important job of emptying trash throughout the events on Saturday and Sunday. Please consider lending a hand for even an hour or maybe 2. Bring your friends or make it a family service project and help us to continue to make this one of Milton's most memorable events of the year. Please check out our website, miltonmusicfest.org, or follow us on Facebook. And before I close tonight, I would like to recognize and thank Brian Kelly, who was one of the founding members of We Are Milton. Brian stepped down this year after 10 years of sharing his enthusiasm, creativity, and tireless can-do attitude. His easy laugh and energy is sorely missed by our committee, and we want to thank him from the bottom of our hearts. If you see Brian Kelly around town, I hope you'll stop him and say, thanks and job well done. We hope to see you all on Hutchinson Field on June 25th and 26th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sheridan. One other brief announcement. Last night, I announced that the memorial service for Ted Hayes, a longtime elected official and appointed official, is on June 18, but the time is 11 a.m., so Saturday, June 18 at 11 a.m. With that, what I'd like to do is recognize Mike Zulis of the Select Board. Mike has asked for permission to make a motion on one of the articles. Mr. Zulis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting member of the Select Board. Mr. Moderator, in order to accommodate the schedule of a resident who is a member of the Municipal Broadband Committee and who will make the presentation with respect to Article 44 and who was unavailable on Thursday evening, I move to take Article 44 out of order so that it may be considered now rather than in the order in the warrant.
Thank you, Mr. Zulis. It's very clear. Is there a second from the floor? If someone would be willing to second, could you put it in the chat session, Q&A chat? I see Rob Lavash is seconded. Very good. This is debatable. Does anyone have a question on the motion to take up Article 44 right now? I see 3 hands. Yes, Mr. Matthews, Mr. Gallery, and Ms. Will. Mr. Matthews, you're recognized.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake.
We hear you now. Was that a mistake?
Yes, it was a mistake. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, very good. Ms. Will, your hand is raised. Do you wish to speak to the motion to move Article 44?
I was raising my hand to second the motion to
Very good.
consider. the article.
Just a note, I see your comment now. Yes, if you would say so moved or second in the chat, we can get through this very quickly. So thank you for that. Seeing no further hands raised, this just requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. Nope, I don't see the poll yet. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. Please remember to click submit when you're done. We could unmute the phones. All those in the phone in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. We can mute the phones.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, if you could close the poll, put up the results. The motion carries with 175 yes at 90%, 15 no at 8%, and 4 abstains at 2%. With that, we'll proceed to Article 44, which is on page 47 of your warrant. I'm first going to recognize Mr. Arthur Doyle of the Select Board. Mr. Doyle, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, can you now hear me?
I can hear you now, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moderator, Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7 member. At this time, I would like to request that the moderator recognize Mike Zulus to address Article 44.
Thank you. Mr. Zulus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I, in turn, would ask that the moderator recognize a resident, Mark Day, who is a member of the Municipal Broadband Committee and has prepared a presentation with respect to Article 44.
Very good. Yeah, Mr. Day contacted me. He is a registered voter of the town. He's submitted a presentation which I've approved. So, Mr. Day, you are recognized. And I see the presentation is up.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Good evening. My name is Mark Day, and I'm here to talk to you about Article 44. Next slide, please. I'm here on behalf of the Municipal Broadband Committee. We have been working on this for some time. Next slide, please. Here is the text of Article 44. It's identical to the article that was passed at last year's town meeting, also as Article 44. The part that is highlighted in yellow is the reason for wanting to have this article. It would be useful for the town to have a legal entity that can operate a municipally owned broadband network. Next slide, please. Here's the rest of what I'm going to go through. I'm going to provide some context by returning to slides from last year's town meeting. I'm going to review the current status of the INET and the MLP. I'm going to clarify the distinction between the INET effort and the fiber to the home effort. I'm going to sketch out the likely financial flows. I'm going to give you some sense of the market demand, and then I'm going to ask you to vote in favor of the article. Next slide, please. Here's a slide from last year's town meeting, which is just here to underscore that this was our vision and continues to be our vision. Internet access as a utility for residents and businesses, and a town-owned fiber optic network as the latest form of municipal infrastructure. Next slide, please. Here's another slide from last year's town meeting in which we highlighted the fact that the vote happening on the MLP was just the first of two, thus that you are here arrow. Next slide, please. This is an updated version of the same slide, to indicate that we are now at MLP vote 2. And also we've done a marketing study which largely fills the role of the townwide feasibility study that was on the previous list. So I've checked that off as well. Next slide, please. Here's the last slide that I'm repeating from last year, reminding what an MLP is. A municipal light plant is a legal entity, a kind of a company owned by a municipality. It's defined in Massachusetts law, and all of the advice that we've received says that this is the best way for a Massachusetts town to own and operate a municipal broadband network. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the current status of the INET and the MLP. Next slide. The town has decided to move forward with replacing the existing obsolete network. The INET, for institutional network, connects town buildings and schools. The slide summarizes the combination of federal and town funding involved. There's an RFP being prepared and discussed in consultation with the experts in town who would be the key users and maintainers of this network after it's built. Next slide, please. The INET project has a primary purpose to simply support the same things that are currently going over the existing obsolete network. However, the nature of network construction means that it is essentially free to overbuild the network. It will have excess capacity that could be used as the backbone for a residential network. That's not in any sense required, but it is an interesting option. Next slide, please. Now let me tell you about the MLP status. Town meeting voted last May by a substantial margin to set up a municipal light plant. I'll mention that Quincy has now followed us down this path, taking their first MLP vote a year after us. Under state law, the MLP establishment requires a second vote within 13 months, which is what this article is about. If the second vote fails, we can't restart the process for 2 years. Next slide, please. Let me emphasize that this vote is about preserving options. This is not a vote about the INET. The INET is being built, it's been funded, it's in progress. We don't need the MLP to operate the INET. We do need the MLP if we're going to consider having a network with paying subscribers. An MLP is vaguely like an enterprise fund that lets us separate out the financial flows of the broadband network from the town's other operations. An MLP allows for business decisions to be focused on the financial and operational requirements of a broadband network. Confirming the MLP keeps open the option of building the fiber to the home broadband network, and in particular, it will give the town additional credibility in speaking with potential vendors and partners. Next slide, please. Next, let's distinguish INET issues from the issues of fiber to the home. Next slide, please. The INET is about town services, and it's primarily infrastructure for the town to do its existing business. A secondary role of the INET is allowing the town to do new things, one of which is the possibility of serving as network connectivity for other kinds of activities. In contrast, fiber to the home is about consumer or retail internet service to households, a new option for internet access. In case there's any confusion, I'd want to underscore that there's no effort to replace cable TV. A municipal fiber to the home network would be pure internet connectivity and would not be a content business. Next slide, please. This chart, one forward, thank you. This chart highlights the difference in the responsible entities for construction and operation between the INET and fiber to the home. We're focusing today on fiber to the home, where the construction would be run by the town and the operation of the network would be run by the MLP. Next slide, please. This chart likewise highlights the difference in funding sources between INET and fiber to the home. We're focusing today on fiber to the home, where the construction would come from some combination of subscriber capital payments and town bonding, and operations would be fully funded by subscriber monthly payments. Next slide, please. Now let me go into some more detail about the likely financial flows into and out of the MLP. Next slide, please. This first diagram assumes that the whole fiber to the home network is already built and paid for. The money comes in from monthly subscriptions, and the money goes out in the form of maintaining and repairing the physical network, as well as paying for interconnection and bandwidth from other service providers. Next slide, please. This second diagram makes the opposite assumption, focusing exclusively on building the network. The money comes in from subscriber capital and or from the debt markets via the town floating a bond. The money goes out into construction costs. Next slide, please. One back. Oh, thank you. There are two basic sources of capital for construction. One of them is from would-be subscribers who would pay for the opportunity to connect. A roughly comparable situation is when a house is connected to a gas line. The capital charge for network connection covers both the individual house connection plus a share of the cost to reach that neighborhood. The other key source of capital for construction is bonding by the town. The debt service would still be from subscriber payments. We can use these sources of capital in some combination that's yet to be determined. I'm not going to attempt to resolve that today. We don't yet have enough information. Next slide, please. This diagram combines the two previous ones as well as a little additional information to give a more realistic flow of funds in and out. Money comes in from a combination of monthly subscriptions from subscribers, subscriber capital, debt, and possibly payments from institutions in town that are using the network. Money goes out for maintenance and repair, network charges, ongoing construction of the part of the network that's not yet finished, as well as debt service for the debt that we took on. Next slide, please.
Mr. Day, you have about 3 minutes left.
Okay, there's no appetite in town for tax subsidies, and there's no appetite for a tax levy. Accordingly, any debt service must be fully covered by the monthly subscriber fees. Next slide, please. Likely market demand. Next slide, please. The term take rate is important in discussions of broadband networking. The take rate is the fraction of potential households that are subscribing to a network. It's designed to cover the entire town, but we know that not everyone in town will subscribe. Because there are two incumbent service providers in at least parts of the town, a plausible target for a take rate is 40%. Next slide, please. The committee recommended and select board funded a market survey by an outside consultant, which was published in February 2022. Even taking a conservative view, 54% of those surveyed would pay $60 a month for 100 megabit per second service, and 51% would pay $80 a month for gigabit per second. Those numbers are well above our conservative 40% take rate. Next slide, please. The next question is whether we can plausibly hit those price points. We're using here pro forma costs that are adjusted from estimates originally developed for Quincy. When we adjust those for our different circumstances, we wind up with an estimate of $35 per premise per month in capital cost and $30 per premise per month in operating cost. Next slide, please. That means that our overall expected cost in this back of the envelope calculation is $65 a month. The service only needs to break even at a 40% take rate since all the finance and operation costs are already included. This exercise is not a guarantee that we can make it work financially, but it does seem to indicate that it would be reasonable to proceed to more detailed analysis and design. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to conclude. Next slide, please. This is not a request for funding. The INET is already fully funded and in process. Some future town meeting may be asked to approve debt for funding the fiber to the home network, but that is not on the table here. Approving the MLP does not obligate the town. It just allows us to continue moving forward. Next slide, please. Article 44 confirms the creation of the MLP. Voting yes creates it as a legal entity, enabling us to continue the pursuit of residential broadband and fiber to the home with potential vendors. If we go forward, the committee would expect to report back, including a more detailed financial plan at the October town meeting. Voting no would mean that the town cannot pursue an MLP again for at least 2 years, which would mean that there is no viable path to residential broadband during that interval. A yes vote is recommended unanimously by the Municipal Broadband Committee, by the Select Board, and by the Warrant Committee. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Mr. Day, thank you. And right on time at 10 minutes. I know you rehearsed that and you did very well. So I appreciate the adherence to our rules. Does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation? Please signify by raising your hand. I see one. Okay, Mr. Fundling, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'm Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Just a couple questions. One is that, thank you, Mr. Day, for that presentation. You did say near the end that you might come back to town meeting for funding later, which means you might not. I guess I don't know if we're debating fiber to the home tonight or not, but it certainly sounded, my concern is that if we approve this, you could just run with the project of fiber to the home without asking town meeting again. So I guess that's my first question is, if we're doing this fiber to the home project, would town meeting be asked for the okay at some point in the future? And my second question, as Mr. Day might recall, I previously was on the committee And one thing I remember from my time there was that, if I recall correctly, the only other municipalities in Massachusetts that have municipal fiber to the home fall in one of two categories. Either one, they have, I'll call it a real municipal light plant, like actually providing electricity to the homes, which means they have employees who have bucket trucks and are used to climbing up poles. So that's an obvious advantage to putting fiber up there. Every town either seemed to fall in that category, or it's in the middle of nowhere, and that was the only internet option they had. So when I saw that, it made me think, well, Milton may not be a good fit. So sorry, I asked you two very different questions. I apologize for that, but I'll go on mute, and I appreciate the answers. Thanks.
Thank you. I think before I go, Mr. Day, I may go to our elected official first. Mr. Zulus, as a member of the committee, do you wish to answer these questions? Mr. Zulus, you there?
Oh,
there you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulus, Precinct 3 Town Meeting member of the Select Board. Yes, I will take the two questions, and if Mark wants to add something. Number one, can the town run with the project without further town meeting action? No, it cannot, because there is no money associated with it. In order to run with the project and continue the money, it would have to be funded. And for the funding, we would have to come back to town meeting, and that's what Mr. Day was referring to. Number two, with respect to your review of the project some years ago, it is true that in the past there were some towns in Western Mass, some smaller towns, who had pursued this project, and there were other towns of our equivalent size who had the foresight 100 years ago to set up municipal light plants, and they were providing electrical and also internet service through their municipal light plant. Since that time, several cities and towns have moved forward and are trying to move forward with projects like this, such as Weymouth, such as Quincy, such as Falmouth, and others as well that I don't have right at hand. So this is something that is moving forward in several other cities and towns. The effort is to come up with a plan to develop better, faster, cheaper internet. Other cities and towns are seeing the possibility. Milton has seen the possibility for the last year, and we hope we can move forward with it. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus. Mr. Fundling looked like he dropped his hand, so I think you answered his questions. I see three names, Ms. Martland, Mr. Furs, and Mr. Gilmore. Ms. Martland, you're recognized.
Hi, Genevieve Martland, Precinct 4. I just was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the town of Braintree that seemed to have gotten out of a 20-year contract with their internet for the town, and if that's a concern you see happening here.
Just to clarify, got out of which contract, Ms. Martland?
I believe they're providing internet, and they are no longer doing so and sold back to Comcast.
I see. Okay. Again, I'll go to Mr. Zulus unless you defer.
Mr. Moderator, I can tell you that there were idiosyncratic business reasons for Braintree getting out of this. They had an obsolete system that had been in place for many years. Ours, because we've already funded a new iNet, would be a brand new system. So I think that's the primary difference, that Braintree had an obsolete system that was going to require heavy additional capital costs. We have and they had patched it together for many years. We have already funded, without any increase to the taxpayer, we've already funded a brand new iNet that could serve as the backbone. So I think the main difference is that we'll have brand new technology. We're not going to have an obsolete system that we're patching together that will increase costs.
Thank you, sir. Next, I see Mr. Furs. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brian Furs, Precinct 10. First, I wanted to rise or speak in favor of this. I have been frustrated as a resident of the town for many years that we don't have alternate opportunities to bring internet access to our home other than Comcast, at least in the portion of Milton that I live in. So this has created a situation where pricing is exceedingly high for internet services that require my family to have cable that we may or may not need, since we need the internet capability in our home. So I applaud this effort. I did have two questions. One is, will the fiber be installed above ground on poles, or is it beneath the roads? And if the latter, how would any road impacts be dealt with by the construction? My second question relates back to some of the questions that have been asked about Braintree and Weymouth, and that is any of the either intellectual or physical infrastructure that we're working on here, does that provide an opportunity in the future for the town to potentially offer electricity like some of these other towns, which have, as a former resident of Braintree can attest, is typically far less expensive as a consumer? So those are my two questions. I thank you for your efforts on this.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Furs. Again, Mr. Zulus, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, with respect to where the fiber will go, the feasibility study that was produced for the INET and the INET in Milton and Fiber to the Home in Milton has the fiber primarily going on the poles. There are some sections that may require beneath the ground. That will be part of the design and construction process if we get to that point, if town meeting funds it. But I can tell you that the feasibility study showed the great majority of the fiber being on the poles as opposed to being underground. Second, with respect to electricity, that is not a consideration of our community, of our committee in any way, shape, or form. We've been focusing on municipal broadband, so I cannot speak, and the committee cannot speak with respect to electricity at all.
Thank you, Mr. Zulus. I see Mr. Fundling raised his hand. Mr. Fundling, do you have a comment, question? You may be down the list a little bit.
Oh,
there he is. There you are.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Jay Fundling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. I'm also an Eversource employee, so I may be able to help with Mr. Furs' question about electricity. I remember this coming up at Eversource at work a few years ago, and I do not remember the details, so take this for the secondhand information that it is, but we looked into this question, and it's, if not impossible, then extremely difficult. Let's say all but impossible for a new municipal electric service to start up. I may have just gotten myself in a lot of trouble and maybe even fired, but no, that's so to answer Mr. Furs' question, I think this is unlikely or impossible that this will lead to municipal electricity.
Well, we'll back you up, Mr. Fundling, if anyone comes after you. So, but thank you for your candor. With that, I see Mr. Gilmore and Ms. Anderson. Mr. Gilmore, you're recognized. Looks like Mr. Gilmore dropped his hand. Nope, he's back. There he is.
Brian Gilmore, Precinct 10. I live at 333 Brush Hill Road in Milton, and it's a community of 17 condominium, single-family triplex homes. And we're currently and have been in negotiation with Verizon for almost 2 years about replacing the copper wire service to these units. They're all buried underground. And as you can imagine, we're concerned about the expense, if necessary, to have fiber optics installed underground if the conduits aren't serviceable for the installation. So I'm not asking, my question is, I don't want to have an empty bag in my hand when we go to the trustees about this situation. We're generally supportive of competition in the marketplace, and we have had the same complaints about high rates for services. On the other hand, we are a small community, we have a limited budget, and we're negotiating at this point with Verizon to replace the copper wires with fiber optics underground. And in some cases, that may not be possible unless Verizon invests in the services to bury those wires. So I just want to go on record that the mansions of Brush Hill are positive about the idea, but we're concerned about the cost as it relates to our individual subject.
Thank you. So that was a statement, sir, rather than a question.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Next, we'll go to Ms. Anderson, and after that, I see Ms. Riccardella. Ms. Anderson, you're recognized.
Hi, thank you. April Anderson, Precinct 2, town meeting member. I just have a couple of questions. One, I want to make a comment and just say thank you to Mr. Zulus and the committee for taking on this issue. I'm always happy to see the town thinking out of the box, and I appreciate your efforts. Someone mentioned Braintree earlier, and from what I understand, the situation in Braintree was absolutely, as Mr. Zulus talked about, as being an obsolete system. But from what I understood is that it became obsolete because over 20 years, the community didn't have the resources necessary to continue investing in the infrastructure. And so I'm wondering if we can just hear a little bit about what the feasibility shows for ongoing capital costs. I used to sit on the capital planning committee, and I know that there's incredible demands for road improvements and school building improvements and a variety of other things. So I just want to know a little bit more about what the capital needs are moving forward.
Capital needs ongoing. All right, very good. Again, Mr. Zulus, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So my understanding is that Braintree made the decision not to invest. With respect to the costs, the goal here is to have the bonding and the servicing covered by the subscriber cost. And as Mr. Day pointed out, if we get a take rate above 40%, the numbers work. Now, we'll have to move forward to refine them, and we'll have to enter into an agreement with a partner who can help us make those work. But the goal is to have the subscriber cost spread over a number of subscribers, satisfy the bonding costs and the servicing costs going forward of any ongoing maintenance. So that's the goal, and that's what we'll seek to do with any partner. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Oh, and Mr. Moderator, I just wanted to mention, if I might, with respect to Mr. Gilmore's statement, our committee meets generally Monday mornings at 8 a.m., generally every week, or at least twice a month, but generally every week. And so we'd be happy to make sure that the lines of communication are open with the Brush Hill neighborhood, area, so that we can make sure there's no duplicative efforts here, and there's no and we can coordinate our efforts with respect to conduits. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Very good. Ms. Anderson, I still see you unmuted. Did you have follow-up?
I do not.
Very good. The last hand I see is Ms. Riccardella. Ma'am, you are recognized.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Riccardella. I'm town meeting member precinct 3. My question is if we could see a bit more of the detail behind the costs and that break-even point. Completely understand that the goal is to have a take rate of a minimum of 40% to cover the costs. All due respect, it's always the goal of any venture for your income to cover your costs and then some. I would say would be going up against and competing against some pretty steep competition. So, a survey with responses of 450 town members is interesting, but it hardly seems vigorous enough to really warrant this without further understanding of precisely the costs. Who are we going to be hiring to maintain this broadband? Who's going to be marketing it? So I would really appreciate more information.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, Mr. Zulus, would you like the first bite? I see Mr. Day's hand up. And Mr. Zulus, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I will defer to Mr. Day, but I will say that there is a feasibility study that was commissioned 2 years ago that specifically lays out all the costs. And that report by a group known as CTC is online, is available, and all those specific projected costs are in that report. Number two, with respect to the survey, the experts who conducted that survey tell us that is a statistically significant sample. And so that's all we have to go by is what the experts are. And third, I would say at this point, we have enough information to know that this is a good possibility for this town. We need to do more work. We need to develop a relationship with a partner going forward. But in order to do that, in order to keep this option open, we need to move forward with this vote tonight. Otherwise, we don't move forward. So I'll defer to Mr. Day because I may have missed something.
Thank you. Mr. Day, you're recognized.
Yes, I actually was going to say that I thought Ms. Riccardella was sounding very much like myself. I think that it's important to realize that we're at the stage of just establishing, if you like, sanity checks on this. I think that it is perfectly reasonable to want to have more detail, to want to have better models, to be sure that the town is doing something that is financially sound. I believe that will come in the future. I think that we simply don't have enough detail at this point. And to some extent, what we're trying to do is to move forward so that we can develop those kinds of information.
Thank you, sir. I see two more hands raised, Mr. Coyle and Mr. Mulligan. Mr. Coyle, you're recognized.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Coyle, Precinct 7 in East Milton. I have questions about the maintenance responsibility. Right now, I'd like to know who owns the current poles and who's responsible for tree trimming, especially in the dense neighborhoods like East Milton. One of my neighbors called Eversource and they said, well, they're just not going to do it anymore. It's not viable for them to do it. You know, it's too much trouble. I tried to call Comcast to take down some old wires that were falling down. They just never reply. So we have Comcast, RCN, and Eversource wires all over the place. Many of them are low hanging on certain streets, just worse than others. There's a lot of construction improvements going on in homes. So there's a lot of activity there that involves Verizon, RCN, Comcast, and Eversource, and Milton, the town, the street lights. So, you know, it's like you're trying to put something in a jungle here that's already somewhat out of control. I mean, if everything works, you can get it done, but it's more wires being added to a already problem that has a lot of issues on maintenance that are just, it's not clear to the homeowners at all as to who's responsible for what. So I don't know if this, anyway, that's my question, the responsibility. Could somebody please explain all what's going to happen?
Thank you, Mr. Coyle. By the way, I've been notified there's a couple of points of order coming in. Since I think it was Mr. Zulus that mentioned that the wires might be on poles, I thought that Mr. Coyle's question about poles and vendors was within the scope and a reasonable question. So with that, Mr. Zulus, I'll start with you. I think it was two parts. Who owns the poles amongst all the competing vendors? And second, I guess, tree trimming related to the wires that we might be stringing.
So, Mr. Moderator, Verizon owns the poles, and some of the frustration that Mr. Coyle has articulated has led to the work of this committee. As to the tree trimming on the wires, was that the other question?
Yes, who's responsible for tree trimming around those wires? Yes,
around the wires. I don't know. I'm not sure. I know the answer to that.
I'll try. Mr. Go ahead. Mr. Zulus, if Mr. Day is raising his hand, he may have an answer on that.
Let him take it, please.
Mr. Day, if you can shed some light.
I can't shed light on the tree trimming specifically, but I wanted to note that roughly half the poles in town are owned by Eversource, the other half by Verizon. So that is one of the things that contributes to the complexity, is that the ownership is not simple. I did want to also note the fact that these two different CTC reports that dealt with the network design and dealt with the the market response from CTC are both available on the committee's webpage. The one about the network design in particular goes into the question of pole attachments and make-ready issues in some detail and may be of use to people who are concerned about this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Coyle. You're still unmuted. Your question satisfied?
Yes, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions still, and I'll just leave it like that. I mean, I realize it's difficult to answer, but it is also a public safety issue. That's the main reason I raised the question.
Understood. Thank you, sir. By the way, when I'm reading names of people who have their hands raised, a number of members have said they used to look at the high school and see who was waiting down by the stage, thinking that if someone is going to speak like I would speak, I don't need to go down and comment. So that's why I'm reading names that I can see in the panelist list. With that, I see Mr. Mulligan and Ms. Agostino. Mr. Mulligan, you're recognized.
Jim Mulligan, Precinct 2. I appreciate the questions, and I certainly appreciate the effort of the people who are trying to put this together. I think what people are asking for are details that at this point, we're simply trying to, in my point of view to this is, I don't want to back us into a corner. I would vote for this right now, and recognizing that if we say no tonight, then we can't do anything for 2 years, versus if we vote yes, we move this question forward, it gives the people that have been working on this the opportunity to answer the details, to get more particulars that people seem to want. And I think this is a great effort. Maybe it's not the end all and be all, maybe it's not the perfect solution, but I applaud their efforts. I just think we can't back ourselves into a corner. We need options. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, the last hand I see is Ms. Agostino. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Diane DiTullio, Agostino, Precinct 9. And I just want everyone to know that the moderator's comment that the subject brought up by the individual regarding trees and Eversource and Verizon and owning the poles is so much a part of this question that it's difficult to even discuss it. During the last 12 months, I unfortunately uncovered, along with the former town administrator manager, that the reason the internet Comcast was unavailable so often was due to the electricity going down. So if we're going to move forward, I'd implore this committee to absolutely, it is Eversource, Verizon, they're the ones that go out and trim the trees. Some neighborhoods have actually fought back against that. I know that the area from where I live up off of Randolph Ave heading towards Cunningham Park, we've lost our electricity so many times that people are putting in the Generacs to have power restored. And we learned that it's going to be another year. It actually is because we have low voltage to the whole area. So all the phone calls to try to find out why our internet through Comcast kept going down, it took almost a year before we realized it was due to brownouts and it was due to trees taking limbs down. And I'm not talking, an occasional limb dropping or an occasional brownout or an occasional. It was finally when I informed the town individual that it really was, as the prior person mentioned, a matter of public safety. It was a matter of life or death. It really was. So I implore this committee to work with the DPW, which usually gets the notices. You know how we can report a problem in town if we're concerned about a dead tree, for them to notify either Eversource or Verizon. So it is 100% connected to the supply of electricity, whether or not we get the internet service. So please work to answer his questions, his concerns, and I'd actually ask you to start working on that as soon as possible for those people who, don't have a Generac backup in order to be able to access important emails, life-threatening emails. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I see, by the way, I did see the Port of Warner was notified about that. Again, Ms. Agostino was commenting on embellishing comments made either by elected officials or by other members. And my tone in town meeting is to allow our town meeting members to speak, particularly since Ms. Agostino only used up about 2 minutes and 40 seconds. With that, I'll go to Mr. Fahey. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. One question. If town meeting votes yes tonight, could you please explain what is it that we will be committed to, and at what interval town meeting would make additional decisions with regard to this? And I will say, I do appreciate all the hours and the effort that the committee has put into this. I think it's terrific that we have an opportunity to consider it, but I would like for the residents to understand what we would be committed to if we said yes.
Thank you. Understood. Mr. Zulus, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There is no commitment, no financial commitment. There is no appropriation with this article. The next step would be for the committee to seek out a partner to work with on this project. If that ultimately would require funding, we would have to come back to town meeting. And the goal, I think is fair to say, the committee's goal would be to seek a partner over the next few months and to come back to town meeting in October with a partner and with a proposal for entering into a relationship with that partner. Not full financing at that point, it doesn't seem to me, but enough financing to enter into a relationship with a partner to develop that system. And then subsequently, perhaps next year, we would come back to town meeting with a full-blown proposal. That's a general idea of how it may go forward.
Mr. Fahey, I see you're unmuted. Any follow-up?
I just have one for Mr. Zulus. Is it within consideration of the committee to increase the sampling from the number of 450 to a larger number if 40% is the point where it becomes feasible? That feels to me like it's a number that's probably around 4,000. So we only have a sampling of about 10% of the required number of residents that would be needed to make it feasible.
Mr. Zulus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fahey. The only thing I would say to that is this is what the survey experts have told us is a statistically significant sample. We came in higher than they said we needed to make it statistically significant. I'm not in that field, and so I can't say whether it would be better or worse. But that's what those who have developed the report tells us. And as I think Mr. Day mentioned, the report is on our webpage, and anyone can take a look at it and see the full-blown process. The full-blown process and the statistics and how they came to the conclusion that they did.
And Mr. Day,
thank you, Mr. Zulus.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. Mr. Day, can you shed some light on this sample question? So
I just wanted to note that a larger survey would have cost us more money, but would not necessarily have told us anything different. The actual difference that matters is when it comes time for people to commit money, and we don't know for sure whether they will do that in line with what they said in the survey, and making the survey larger wouldn't actually address that problem.
Thank you, sir. All right, I see no new hands, but I see 2 repeat hands. So we're at the point where we'll recognize the repeat speakers and then go to a vote. So Ms. Agostino and then Mr. Furs.
It's actually a point of order, Mr. Moderator. I only caught your comment after my points regarding Article 44. So could you please clarify why you made the comment? Did someone, I can't see anything in the question and answers with someone raising a point of order regarding my comments. So I'd like to understand why your comment was made.
Yes. I've been notified in the chat of Zoom, the Q&A chat, that members are commenting on our questions or statements being made by members within scope of the article. And so since I was able to tell from the tone of the question and the content of it, what they were asking, I was answering a question about scope of the comments.
So therefore, I will make the following comment. However, that's not showing up on my chat. So I don't know why the chat's not showing all the comments. So I'll be very specific here regarding Article 44. The lines that provide service to our homes, whether it's Comcast, RCN, whatever, are powered by electricity. And I only learned this after months and months of being unable to communicate regarding a life or death matter. That is not out of scope in any means. And the fact that anyone would raise it as being out of scope means that my point is not understood. So if you have someone in the hospital and you need to communicate constantly with their doctors, and you can't do that for months because your electricity is browning out or going out. And then, I mean, Town Hall finally did get one of the top people at Comcast to get involved. And it was only when I realized that the Comcast was going out precisely at the moment that my emails or messages through a medical portal were not being received. That's when we realized it, that it had to do with the power. So if we're going to pass Article 44, and if this committee is doing all this work to bring us better service, then the issue of power is critical to us receiving this type of service at our homes when we most critically may need it. So I want to make 100% sure that town meeting members understand the connection. And I do thank the individual who reminded me that it is a public safety issue, and that I trust tomorrow this committee will further investigate that entire situation throughout the town, because it's not just the area from my neighborhood down to Cunningham Park, as the other town meeting member said.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Understood. Thank you, ma'am. We'll go to Mr. Furs then, and then I'd like to close out and go to a vote. Mr. Furs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As I said earlier, I support this article. I'd like to see it pass. There seems to be some concern around potential costs associated with this and impact to the town budget. I'm wondering, and before I make any motion, I'd like to get an opinion from the select board, if there'd be an acceptance of a friendly amendment to add the words budget neutral before appropriate, or excuse me, before necessary and appropriate action in this article.
Let's see. Can you just point me to the line?
Certainly, it would say recommended that the town vote to authorize the select board to take all budget neutral, necessary, and appropriate action.
I understand. Thank you. Okay, it's a friendly amendment. So I think
it's a question to the select board if they would accept that. I'd rather not submit a amendment that would need to go to a vote.
Right. Okay. Why don't I turn that over to the select board, let them consider that. By the way, Ms. Agostino asked a question in her comments that I'll answer. Why isn't the chat visible to everyone? It was my decision in implementing this technology to avoid opening up a chat and all the comments being visible. That would then create a giant sidebar conversations at town meeting, as opposed to directing all the comments through the moderator. So that is why we've closed the chat off, so you can just communicate into the moderator rather than opening up sidebar conversations. And meanwhile, I see a comment here. Someone is mentioning that town meeting members, non-town meeting members have not asked me to speak on Article 44. So I've had no one ask permission for non-town meeting members to speak. So with that, Select Board, are you considering this friendly amendment? Folks, I'll just step away for a minute.
Mr. Moderator?
Yeah. Mr. Doyle, you saved me a walk.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We have conferred rather. I apologize for that. Slip of the tongue. And let me turn to Mr. Zulus, who will speak.
Thank you. Mr. Zulus, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And thank you, Mr. Furs. This article and this recommendation as drafted is budget neutral. There is no budget appropriation associated with this. The concern about adding that language is as follows. This article and this language will go to the Department of Public Utilities for approval. And this is the language that that has been approved previously by the Department of Public Utilities. We don't know if adding that language, which is not necessary because it doesn't, the article doesn't provide for any budget or any appropriation. We don't know if adding that language might create a problem with getting approval by the Department of Public Utilities. And so for that reason, I believe the Select Board doesn't support the friendly amendment, with regrets, Mr. Furs, because I understand it, but the article as it stands is budget neutral, does not provide for any budget. So I think we're okay on that point. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Furs, before I go to the warrant committee, because this is actually their recommendation on the floor and they're the decider of friendlies, do you still want to proceed to the next step with the warrant committee with your friendly?
No, thank you. I appreciate Mr. Zulus' comment. I do not have a motion at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Then I see one new hand raised and went down. And then the last hand I see up is who's also a second-time speaker. According to my notes, Mr. Gilmore, you're recognized.
Mr. Moderator, can we move the question to be acted upon?
If that's the last thing, I see no other hands, and I'll proceed to a vote.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, there was a member, can I just confer with my staff here? There was a question, but I'm going to stop taking any more questions at this point and just get a thank you. I just received a note from a member who said they had difficulty with the raise hand button and they were trying to speak. And because of that, I was going to recognize Mr. John Cochran. So Mr. Cochran, since you had that technical difficulty, would you like to speak to this recommendation?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
Okay, Bob, this is John Cochran, Precinct 5, town meeting member. Bob, I would like to, my wife is involved in the,
I'm right. Yeah, I'm right.
If
I am
she
right
can
here.
speak,
I'm on another device and I did sign in and I did have my hand raised and apparently it's not.
Excuse me, ma'am, before we go, ma'am, could you identify yourself?
Yes, this is Rosemary Cochran. Sorry, Bob.
And I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not a town meeting member and I didn't receive permission in advance for you to speak, which is our policy. So please ask your question through Mr. Cochran, who's an elected town meeting member. Perhaps you go on mute, consider the question, and we'll speak to Mr. Cochran. We'll put you on mute for a minute while you consider that.
Good. To say something. You need more detail.
Hello, Mr. Moderator, this is John Cochran. Bob?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to have to move on, Bob. I guess if through my wife, I'm not qualified to actually get technical about the subject at hand, about the broadband, and so that's why I wanted her to speak, Bob. If she could speak for 30 seconds and just give her a comment, I would appreciate that. I didn't know we had to sign up beforehand.
I'm sorry, sir. This is something I take very seriously to make sure we follow the rules, so I'm going to have to decline that request.
Okay. All right, Bob.
With that, I see no other hands being raised, and so I'm going to go to the vote. Let me describe two things about this vote. First, it is a 2/3 vote, and second, I've been informed by Town Council that during the formation of this municipal light plants, the votes of town meeting members need to be recorded. So your individual yes, no, abstain will be recorded. I'll come back to another point. And so this is something it is possible to do in Zoom. It has been impossible for us to do it on every question in Zoom, but we can do it selectively when we know in advance. Now, I'm going to ask the Zoom administrator to open up the mic. I think we have one member that is in the attendee pool that we need to put to panelist.
Yes, hi, Joanne Bonner. I'm trying to promote you to a panelist, so if you could please accept that.
We resolved? All right, could you give me the name of the member or the? All right, Ms. Joanne Bonner, who is currently in the attendee pool. I've been informed by the town clerk that you are not a town meeting member. We need to move you before the vote out of the attendee pool into the panelist pool. When the Zoom administrator tries to promote you, please click as it yes or accept to move out, or we'll just remove you from the meeting entirely. So would you try again to promote to panelist? Good. Thank you, ma'am. If there's any confusion, yes. Also, if a member who's put their name in the system as just Ann, if you could identify yourselves and we will update your name. So again, the member who's just put in their first name of Ann. I see. Okay. Then could you promote? So can Ann, we unmute Ann and she identify herself?
Ann Murphy, Precinct 9 town meeting member.
Thank you. Ma'am, you seem to have 2 logins in the attendee pool, and we can only have 1 login per member. Are you on 2 devices?
I'm only on 1 device.
Okay. Let me just confer with my Zoom admin for a minute. Folks, the reason since we're having this recorded vote, we want to get this exactly right, so pardon the technical challenge. Be right back.
I was also logged in for Home Inc., I think, if that counted.
Yes, ma'am. Would you raise your hand on the device you want to use to vote? Can you click the raise hand button on that device?
On that device? It's not on the screen.
You're on an old version of Zoom. Okay, ma'am, then we're going to use a voice vote. Can you sign out of the other Home Inc.? Or we can sign you out of the other Ann Murphy.
Okay, I'm on this computer. Maybe I'm Home Inc. I can't find the raise hand.
Okay, I understand. What we'll do is we'll try to delete you from the other login. And then we'll ask you to call your vote out when I unmute the phones. So we'll get a voice vote from you. Let me just check with my staff and see if we can remove the other device. Okay, we are now set here. So with that, I'm not going to recognize any other speakers at this point. We're going to go to the vote. So if we could, so Ms. Murphy, just be silent for a moment till I get you. If we could put up the poll. Again, this requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. Remember, please to click submit. If we could unmute the phones. And on the phones, and Ms. Murphy, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Awesome.
And we
Are
have,
you ready for something for me to do?
yes, just say yes if you're in favor of the article, or no if you're opposed, ma'am.
Oh, we're voting.
We're voting, yes. Are you in favor or opposed?
Well, mine is host and panelists can't vote.
Ma'am, just tell me out loud. Are you in favor of Article 44 or
I'm a
are
town
you a no
meeting
vote?
member.
Ms. Murphy? Ms. Murphy, can you hear me? Okay. Ms. Murphy, I'll take your vote as an abstain now at this point. I'm going to close the poll. All right, folks, just hang on a second. We have one other difficulty. All right, thank you. So the yeses pass with 183 yeses at 79%, including the voice votes I counted, 41 no votes at 18%, and 8 abstentions at 3%. I declare a 2/3 vote. So thank you on Article 44. Now, with the indulgence of town meeting members, I have a request. We would normally return back to Article 13 and then 14, which relates to electronic voting, because I anticipate that since I participated in the submission of these articles to the select board, the moderator may be getting questions. Rather than take those questions from the podium, I think it would be more appropriate if town meeting elected a temporary moderator for the consideration of Articles 13 and 14, who would manage the discussion and the vote, and that I would step away from the podium during those 2 articles. However, I think Mr. Walsh is probably best qualified, but I arranged with him in advance that he'd be willing to serve in that role if elected by town meeting for those 2 articles. He was unable to attend tonight. So my request is that we move Articles 13 and 14 to consideration on Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. at the start of business. So that's my motion to move 13 and 14 to the date and time certain of Thursday, June 9 at 7:30 p.m. Is there a so moved and a second in the Q&A chat? I see a so moved by Mr. Furs and a second by Mr. Mulligan. Very good. This is a debatable motion. Does anyone have any questions? If so, they could raise their hands. I see no hands raised. Very good. We'll go to a vote. If we could put up the poll. This requires a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. And please remember to click submit. If we could unmute the phones. And Ms. Murphy. On the phones and Ms. Murphy, if you're in favor of this article, please signify by this motion, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
And opposed? Very good. We can close the poll. The motion carries with 204 yeses at 93%, 9 noes at 4%, and I counted 6 abstains at 2%. With that, we will skip 13 and 14 and proceed to Article 15. Recommended that the town appropriate, let me just confirm with my consent agenda. Is that right, folks? Yes, we pulled 15 out. Very good. Recommended that the town appropriate the amount shown in the following tabulation under the heading recommended FY23 boards and committees. Conservation Commission, 2,500. Council on Aging, 328,349. Historical Commission, 2,240. Personnel Board, 61,835. Planning Board, 141,541. Master Plan Implementation Committee, 30,000. Warrant Committee, 13,053. Total boards and committees, 579,518. And that to meet said appropriation, the sum of 514,518 be raised from the tax levy and 65,000 be appropriated from funds certified by the Department of Revenue as free cash. Does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation? Please raise your hand. And I see Mr. Actually Walker has raised a point of order. So I'll read Mr. Walker's point of order. He said, Mr. Moderator, it was my understanding that at the start of tonight's meeting, we'd be able to resume our discussion of a motion to reopen Article 11. Looking for advice. Mr. Walker, I assumed you would raise your hand if you wanted to make that motion, and I didn't, because we discussed earlier, and I think you were waiting to, from my read, you were waiting to decide. So I was waiting for your raised hand. So if we could discuss this Article 15, and then I'll recognize you right away and discuss your topic. With that, on 15, I see one hand. Mr. Chinman, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to raise an issue regarding the planning board and use this article to do that since it's funding the planning board. Prior to this year, the planning board had a longstanding practice of electing as chair the member who was in the member's last year of the member's term. I think that the reasons for that longstanding practice are pretty obvious. It values experience, and the planning board, more than most elected boards and committees in town, experience matters. It's very technical and law specific, and experience matters. And the policy, the practice, the longstanding practice, it also respects the voters who voted that planning board member onto the board with a legitimate and reasonable expectation that their selection for the planning board would, when it was that person's turn, be the chair. And it also promotes respect and cooperation among the board members because they all get a turn. It doesn't promote factions forming. And as I said, that was the longstanding practice prior to this year. The current planning board, the two newly elected members with the participation of the member who had 1 year of experience, threw that longstanding practice away. Those three members' combined experience on the planning board was 1 year and several days. And they voted to make the member with 1 year of experience the chair. I think that throwing that longstanding practice away is bad for the town. It's bad for the planning board. I know there was a recent planning board member who had the opportunity, who had the votes to become chair in advance of her turn, and she declined and preferred to stick to that practice, the longstanding practice, and wait for her turn to be the chair. It promotes many good benefits for the town. It promotes the usefulness of experience. And I think it's unfortunate that the planning board, these three members with a combined 1 year and several days of experience, decided to upend that longstanding practice. And I think the town meeting members, I don't think we're helpless about this, about something good for the town being rejected. I think we could vote a bylaw change to make experience a factor in who can be the planning board chair. And I know there's a statute about the planning board that says that the planning board chair will be voted from among the number of the members of the planning board. And that makes sense. It's got to be a member of the planning board. I don't read that as putting a limitation on the town's ability to value experience. So I don't think we can expect the planning board to submit a proposed bylaw change, but it could be by citizens petition. And I think if there was a citizens petition to make experience matter, then and if if a majority of town meeting members got behind that citizen petition to make what's good for the town matter, I think that would be powerful and persuasive, and perhaps the planning board would reevaluate whether they want to eject that policy. And I forgot to mention the reason for that policy being rejected and preferring the election as chair of someone with 1 year of experience was stated publicly by the nominating planning board member, who said that his reason for doing so was very simple, that the planning board member with 1 year of experience was, he said, the only town official who supported his candidacy. So it wasn't as if this was a change propelled by something that was believed to be best for the town. It was propelled by political payback. And I just can't see that we want to value political payback over what's good for the town. So I'm willing to be the point person on looking into a citizen's petition for the next town meeting to institute an experience requirement. If town meeting members want to contact me, michael.chinman@gmail.com. I'm easy to find if you Google me. I'll make sure that you get a chance to add your name to that citizen's petition. And as I say, if enough town meeting members join that effort, perhaps the planning board will make the effort irrelevant by adopting a longstanding practice that's good for the town.
Thank you, Mr. Chinman. I'm receiving a number of points of order on whether Mr. Chinman's comments are relevant. Again, as I've said, the article introduces the planning board and its operations. We're funding its operations. I take a very broad view of an elected town meeting member's right to speak on the articles. And so, again, you can keep raising these points of orders. I'm listening intently and making my judgments. And if I see something that I think is out of as inappropriate, let me put it that way, then I'm going to intervene. And I thought Mr. Chinman had the right to go make his points and speak. With that, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 hands raised on this article. With that, I'll go to Mr. Vaughn, Ms. King, Ms. Agostino, and Mr. Furs. Mr. Vaughn, you're recognized.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I'm sorry. The previous speaker brought up a point of a practice from previous planning board members. Is this the law, or is this just a previous practice?
I
Question
will.
one. Question two is,
Okay,
isn't it
thank you.
majority rules on the board? If you nominate someone and others back that nomination, what's the problem?
So the question is this a practice or rule, or is it a majority? Is that the question? Majority vote?
Yes, correct.
All right. I will recognize Meredith Hall, the chair of the planning board. Ms. Hall, can you answer this question?
I'm sorry, I was being asked another question. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes. The member asked, is the practice of electing chair, I think on seniority, if I've stated right, is it a practice or a rule? And what percentage of vote is required to elect a chair on the planning board?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There is actually not a written precedent for electing the chair of the planning board. There's been actually quite a history with various planning board members wanting to have consecutive, be chair for consecutive years. There's been vigorous debate historically, and many members can attest to that, that there is not a consistent rotation. It can be consecutive. And it does just create, just require a quorum, a majority, sorry.
Thank you.
To elect the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. And Mr. Vaughn, if you're still there, I think we didn't hear your name and precinct. Could we recognize Mr. Vaughn?
I apologize. It's Michael Vaughn, Precinct 6. And thank you for the answer. I do have a follow-up question, if I may.
Yes.
If it is done by majority, isn't that answer the question? There was a nomination, it was voted on by the members, and that member does not leave the one that did not make chairperson. They're still on the board. So the experience question.
I think your question may be rhetorical. Okay, thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I think that's a rhetorical question, more of a statement rather than an individual question. With that, I see same points of order. People are saying we're going farther afield. Folks, if we could direct your comments back to the budget going on here, that would be helpful. I see Ms. Agostino and Mr. Furs. Ms. Agostino?
Mr. Moderator, my first point is a point of order. When a point of order is made, when we meet in person, we know which town meeting member is making the point of order. So could you please identify the initial name, since we're not allowed to see all these point of orders? It's, it's a matter of historical information. That's how we would do it. So I'd like the answer to that first.
Ma'am, there are so many that pop up. I'd be stopping and reading literally 4, 5, and 6, and they're all saying the same thing. In addition, in my recollection, when a point of order is raised on the floor, I recall situations under my term and my predecessors when the individual rose up from the town meeting section and just spoke, I think, without identifying themselves. So I'd prefer not to go through and reading multiple points of order and stopping the meeting for each one of them.
To clarify, my point was to just identify or have someone point out to you, because it's the initial person's point of order that matters. I certainly wasn't asking for you to read them all. And with 39 years history as a town meeting member, and I think I might have missed 1 or 2 town meetings due to a death, that seems to be a topic tonight. That would be appreciated, because when a town meeting member stands up to make a point of order, we know who, we can see them. You're right. They may not identify their name. They may not be required to, but it is something that we could see at town meeting. So my budget question is one question, and then a second in response to, since you are allowing this discussion. The first question I have is, because I don't remember the breakdown on this budget, is the chair of the planning board, do they receive any compensation, or any of the planning board members? They don't receive any compensation, right? So the head of the person elected to chair doesn't receive more than the others. I just wanted to clarify that.
Is that is there another question? We can get them both at once.
there was a comment after that answer.
I'll go to Ms. Meredith Hall, Chair of the Planning Board. Can you answer the question on compensation?
Yes, there is no compensation to be the chair or for any of the other board members as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Agostino?
Yes, thank you very much. So that clarifies the point that these individuals are volunteers. They're not paid employees or paid any stipend for doing the job. And the concept that there could be a bylaw just for the planning board to identify who should be the next individual to chair the planning board, I could point to many other boards and committees where individuals with more experience, more years of experience, and with more experience professionally have been passed over. So I strongly hope that the majority of town meeting members aren't jumping on board to say, oh, we need to dictate which volunteer is going to chair the personnel board, because then we're going to start looking at every other board and committee as well. And they are just volunteers. They're not paid. And I appreciate the work of the ones who have been there the longest. And I appreciate the work of those that worked really hard to get elected this year. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I only see one other hand raised, Mr. Furs, and then I'd like to go to a vote unless I see any other hands raised very quickly. Mr. Furs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Moderator Harris. I'll be brief. I agree with Mr. Schinman that there's a concern here with both the experience of the board and candidly the judgment of the board based on the vote that happened. I watched the meeting. It was quite disappointing to see how senior members were treated that evening. And I also call out the fact that the budget that's being put before us would have been voted in by a planning board that now has been disbanded through the last election. As such, I'd like to make a motion to amend this budget to reduce the planning board funding for the studies to the $50,000 that was allocated last year and move that $50,000 into the Master Plan Implementation Committee study budget. I think there's actually a good philosophy here that could require the planning board to incorporate the Master Plan Implementation Committee into its studies, which I think would actually be good practice. But in any case, I think that putting forward the funding that was in place last year for the planning board makes more sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furs. Your motion is very clear. Is there a second? There's a second from Mr. Lavash. Very good. We're now going to discuss the motion to amend, and I'll just restate it, I think, while the warrant committee clerk is working up the map. So we're going to take on page 27, E, Planning Board Studies, rightmost column under FY23 recommendation, we're going to reduce the $100,000 to $50,000. And Mr. Furs' proposal is go down to F, Master Plan Implementation Committee. Take that Master Plan Implementation row and increase that from $30,000 to $80,000. I believe I have that right, Mr. Furs. With that, I'm looking for hands raised for people who want to speak to this motion that's been made and seconded. I see 1, 2 hands. Ms. Jill Clark, you're recognized.
Thank you. Jill Clark, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. It seems, just a comment, it seems clear to me from the comment in the warrant exactly what the additional $50,000 for the planning board is intended to be for, to develop an open space and recreation plan that's outdated and was not able to be completed due to the pandemic. Seems like it would be a considerable hardship for the planning board to go without that increase. So I will vote no on this motion.
Thank you, ma'am. I only see one other hand raised, Ms. Agostino. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. And I also want to emphasize what the previous speaker said and question if the town meeting did vote for this change, does the proponent of the motion, would that $50,000 be used for exactly what's in the comment, but be used under the Master Plan Implementation Committee overseeing that? We just discussed last night the need for more recreational fields and everything else and to have good, safe ones. So just to take the 50 grand and move it without any comment, I know we're waiting for the warrant committee to say yes or no, but can we have some explanation of what that $50,000 would be used for? Because we clearly can see in the comment what it would be used for.
Thank you. Mr. Furs, I'll recognize you to describe the intent for the member.
Yes, I would absolutely support that amendment to my amendment to require that money, that funding be used for the same purpose by the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I think that actually is a discussion that would be very well handled by the larger board, the larger purview of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, in fact.
Okay. And is it satisfactory to you to express your intent, or because we don't have unless you want to put a specific limitation on this, is expressing intent sufficient?
I don't see language that would really appropriately, without significant redrafting, accomplish that. So I would be comfortable with intent personally.
Thank you for that accommodation. Ms. Agostino, you're still unmuted. Do you have a follow-up?
The Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. The only concern, Mr. Moderator, and this would be up to you, is if the residents of the town are clearly, we're supposed to notify the residents through the warrant of what the intent of the expenditure of money is. So if we move the 50,000 that's clearly identified for open space and recreation from the planning board to the master plan, I don't know if it's legally allowed to make that big a change, because it was just noted, there is no way for him to really amend the motion, because all we have here is master plan implementation. We can't specify that 50 grand. So legally, it would appear that 50 grand would be taken away from the specific language that we just raised.
Mr. Moderator.
Maybe I could just make a comment, and I think I'll just check with council on this, but I'm fairly certain that one, you're voting on the dollars that are in the budget, and the comment is meant to provide thinking by the warrant committee into why they approve these dollars. It is my opinion that the boards and committees with these dollars are not legally bound to address the items in the comment, but you're getting an explanation of their intent for the money.
Mr. Moderator, when you speak to town council, it clearly does explain under planning board those studies. It's for a study. Under the master plan implementation committee, it discusses implementation. It doesn't say 50,000 would be used for a study.
Okay, I'll just take a moment. And Mr. Furs, did you have a follow-up question while I've got you here?
My comment was going to be similar to yours, Mr. Moderator, that I don't see any obligation for the planning board to actually spend it on that same topic. That being said, perhaps Ms. DiTullio has identified the way that we can better express our intent here by adding a line for studies under Master Plan Implementation Committee and putting in a line item for $50,000. So that is how I would amend my amendment in order to make this a clear intent.
Okay, so you would like to modify your own motion, which normally I'm trying to avoid modifying motions that have been made and seconded on the floor. But I think since you are the original sponsor and we're trying to get clarity and help the members and the citizens, I will allow that change if I see now a second to your amended work. So your amended language. So what you're now saying is to create a new row under F, Master Implementation Committees. It'll be titled Studies, and the Master Plan Implementation number of 30,000 will remain as is, and the new Studies row will say $50,000, and the total of the MPIC will say $80,000. And I see a second from Ms. Judith White Orlando. Did I get that right, Mr. Furs?
That is correct, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let me just pause. I think with that specificity, I don't think I need any question at the moment from town council, because it seems to have satisfied the individual that made the motion. Now, I still have some members whose hands are being raised and haven't spoken for the first time. By the way, I see the board chairs here. We will I'll recognize the planning board, the select board who is submitting, and finally the warrant committee. I think I'd like to just go to members raising their hands before I go to chairs. So I'll recognize Ms. Tagayas first.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9 and Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. In past years, the line item for that committee has ranged from 30,000 to 50,000. Many more years than not, it was 50,000. And each year, those funds have been used for studies, whether they are planning studies, assistance with zoning, traffic studies, parking utilization studies, et cetera. And so the anticipation would be that that's what the use would be if there were additional funds granted to the MPIC. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this point, I see no other town meeting members, so I'll recognize in order first planning board and then select board and then go to the warrant committee. So Ms. Hall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to comment that the planning board has voted these funds specifically for the allocation to create and update our open space and recreation plan, which falls under the planning board jurisdiction. So we have voted that. So I would think that we would need to have a vote on that by the planning board to move those funds.
And check with town council.
Well, at this point,
town council also to see if this is legal. Thank you.
Well, at this point, yes, it is entirely appropriate that certainly within an individual article, town meeting members are free to move funds within an article. And even if they follow our rules between articles within the overall warrant. So what would help me, Ms. Hall, is what is the opinion right now of the planning board of this motion to amend the budgets? Reduction of 50 from planning board, increase in 50 to master plan implementation committee. Could your committee come back with an answer?
Yes, if you can give us just a moment, we'll come back with an answer. Thank you.
Yes, please. I do see one other hand up, Ms. Christine Hodlin. Ma'am, you're recognized.
Hi, it's Christine Hodlin. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yep. I just have a comment to make, and that is that the town currently has an open space and recreation planning committee. And it seems like that committee has members from many of the different departments in town, and seems like a more appropriate place than in this particular article to add $50,000 to the planning board specifically for this purpose. So I would vote to support this movement of money. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. If I could ask, without any answer back, if the warrant committee and the select board could prepare an answer. So when I'm done with the planning board, I'll go to select and warrant. I'll just step away from the podium for a minute.
Mr. Moderator?
So, Ms. Hall, the moderator is just doing.
Mr. Moderator?
With the planning board at the moment.
I would like to. Okay. Yeah, it's me. Sorry, I think
And said that from
Folks, while I stepped away, I've just got a question the town council is answering for me, and there was a point of order made by Ms. Agostino, who believes that town meeting can move money within budgets, but cannot change the purpose of the funds. So I've got a couple of those questions being asked, and I'll be right back. Pardon me, being answered. All right, folks, there's another point of order that's been raised. Let me answer the first point of order, which was that town meeting can move money, but not change intent. I've conferred with town council, and my belief is, his belief is that one, we're within the scope of a single article. Two, that what we're voting on is not the comments, which indicates intent and explanation, but we're voting on the budgets. Three, the member has said, I want to move a study from one part of the article to a study on the another part of the article. So now we know what the funds are going to be used for. So for all those reasons, I believe it's that transfer of funds within this motion to amend is allowed. Now, a second member, Mr. Pavlicek, has raised a question. He says more than $500 above the MPC's request, which I think means the Master Plan Implementation Committee, in Table 9 is not allowed by our bylaws. I also checked that question with town council, who also got on a conference and got some other advice. My belief is that Mr. Pavlicek refers to a line in our bylaws that says no item more than $500, no appropriation more than $500 should be put forward for consideration by the town. My read, town council's read, is that that is saying that something can't appear in the warrant, which is the consideration of the town, without having gone through the appropriate process, the submitting authority, the boards, and the warrant committee. So in other words, you can't spring a surprise $500 out of more than $500 out of thin air. It has to have come from somewhere. Now at this point, and there's another rule in place, I believe it's rule 13 in our rules that says town meeting is authorized to increase or reduce an amount, but if they increase, they have to find a corresponding decrease. What the member here has done is increase the master plan implementation line item, and they've identified a corresponding decrease in the planning board item. So I believe they have complied, in my view, in town council's view, with both the bylaws and with our town meeting rules. So at this point, I'm ruling this item in scope, and I think I'm now going to recognize the chair of the planning board who's asked if the town planner could speak since they helped with this budget. And then I'm going to go to the select board and the warrant committee. And Ms. Agostino, I see your point on studies. I'm going to stop on the point of order at this point. I've considered the items and made a ruling in consultation with town council. So now I'd like to recognize Ms. Hall. Ms. Hall, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to recognize Tim Zwinski, our town planner. Thank you.
Mr. Zwinski, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Ms. Hall. I just wanted to talk through a little bit about the mechanics of how this piece of the budget came together. I staff both the planning board and the Open Space and Recreation Planning Committee. We have been working with that committee for almost a year now to try to put together a plan to update our open space and recreation plan, which has not been updated since 2006. Part of that has been a determination that the committee would like to procure the services of consulting help, which is something that a lot of towns do. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out funding for that, whether it's CPA or from the parks budget or from Concom budget. And we determined that coming out of the planning board budget would be the easiest thing to do, considering that as a staff person, I staff both of those committees and have access to that budget. The Open Space Committee authorized me to make that request to the planning board. The planning board subsequently authorized me to make a supplemental budget request during the fiscal 23 budget creating process for an additional $50,000 for the purpose of an open space plan and procuring consultant services to put that plan together. The procedural kind of implications of this proposed amendment are not enormous, but they are annoying, is what I'll say, just from a day-to-day kind of operational perspective for my department. Out of the planning board budget, I need a vote of the planning board. Once we put in an RFP, they'll vote on that. They'll authorize me to do the spending to procure their services. It's relatively straightforward. We do it all the time. For that money to come out of Master Plan Implementation Committee, that committee also needs to obviously authorize the spending. But then there's a second step, or actually two second steps, where because that's a jointly appointed committee by the planning board and the select board, both the planning board and the select board need to then jointly authorize any of that spending. I have every confidence that every committee would support this plan. Everyone's been really great about supporting this effort so far. But just from a kind of procedural standpoint, it adds a couple weeks to the process of getting on those agendas, briefing those committees on that expenditure, and then getting those votes together. So I think, we would probably end up in the same place in terms of being able to spend that money on the purpose that we budgeted it for. It just adds a couple more procedural steps that, town meeting can decide whether those are necessary or not. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk through that a little bit.
Thank you. And Ms. Hall, could you give us the opinion of the planning board on this motion to amend?
The planning board would like to support Tim Zwinski and not transfer the funds.
Thank you. Ms. Agostino has raised another point of order on the legality of adding an additional line item for the record. in my view, and here's how I came to this logic. If you look on page 26 at the actual article in unbolded text, you'll see the last phrase under Article 15 says, and to act on anything relating thereto. So the citizens have been warned that something was going to happen with these budgets. Now, the planning board received funding requests that are greater than, pardon me, not the planning board, the warrant committee received funding requests greater than $500. They complied with our bylaws that say you can't put something, a request in the warrant unless you have considered it through our processes, including the select board, the various boards, and the warrant committee. They have complied with that. Third, the member has called out quite clearly that they want to move the concept of a study within the article from one department to another department, both for studies. So I believe for all those reasons that this is a perfectly valid motion by the members, made and seconded, both in compliance with our bylaws, compliance with the town meeting rules, and correctly made in the opinion of this moderator. So with that, thank you for any further points of orders. I've made my ruling. I'm not going to take any more points of orders on this decision. Now, I've heard from the planning board. I'd like to now go to the select board and hear their opinion on this motion to amend.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7 member. The Select Board is unanimous in not supporting the proposed amendment.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to recognize Mr. George Asher, who is the chair of the warrant committee.
Mr. Moderator, the warrant committee does not support this recommendation and this change by a significant majority.
Thank you. By the way, folks, I see other hands raised. We've had a chance to discuss this. I've made a ruling. I'd like to now go to a vote. Now, this motion to amend just requires a majority vote. So with that, if we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. Please remember to click submit if we can unmute the phones.
No.
Thank you. And Zoom admin, if you could give me a signal that when the phones are unmuted, that would be helpful. All right, I have 2 no's. Thank you. We can close, mute the phones. Okay, I think we can close the poll. Can we close the poll, Zoom admin? Thank you. The motion fails with a vote of 87 yeses at 39%, 138 noes at 61%, and 1 abstain at 0%. We'll now return to the article as written and unamended in your warrant. I see Mr. Chinman, I think you initially spoke to this. So before I see your hand is gone. Okay. Anyone wish to speak again back to the original article and the recommendation as printed in the warrant? I see no hands. In that case, we will go to a vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones. Phones are unmuted. All in favor on the phone, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no.
Yes.
2 yeses. Thank you. And Ms. Ann Murphy, if you are there, could you give us a voice vote, yes or no? You'll have to manually unmute on your end to speak, Ms. Murphy. Or Mr. Murphy. Okay, I'll take that as an abstain. Thank you. Can we close the poll? The motion carries with 197 yeses at 91%, 14 noes at 7%, and 7 abstentions at 2%. With that, thank you for Article 15. With my records, we will proceed to Article 16. Recommended that the town vote to appropriate, pardon me. That's right, Mr. Walker, I promised you I would come back to you. So Mr. Walker, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Just to refresh the body's recollection, this was a discussion about the, in Article 11, the fire prevention and training position. And I've had the opportunity today to have 5 different conversations about this matter. So I think I have a better understanding of what happened and what should happen. So this position was discussed and approved in the Public Safety Subcommittee and in the Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee's understanding was that the position had been approved as evidenced by the original comment that was written. The comment was then subsequently reviewed approximately a week before town meeting. The Warrant Committee was informed that that approved budget figure that they had in the warrant did not include the position. The Warrant Committee approved a revised comment on May 31st, and we all got a green sheet on last Sunday. So this is an issue that has much broader implications. I'll tell you a little bit about why I think the position is important in a minute, but let me address the broader issue first. I've talked about previously with town meeting about our structural budget deficit, where at least at the outset of each budget process, expenses will exceed revenues. And in addition, we saw, if you were looking at the warrant or the school's budget presentations or reading the Milton Times, the school's rollover budget for the fiscal 23 budget process, the cost of that rollover was between 5 and 6%. This meant that simply rolling things forward without any additional positions or any additional programs, the cost was approximately an additional $2.5 million.
Mr. Walker, can I just ask a question?
Yep.
Are you planning a motion in this discussion?
I'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay, by the way, a member asked a point of order about 24 hours. That refers to the size majority to reopen an article, which is the topic Mr. Walker is addressing. Thank you, sir. Continue, please.
Thanks. So this additional cost of $2.5 million in the school's budget puts immediate pressure on the town administrator to try to balance an already unbalanced budget. What's the impact of that? The resulting impact is that year after year, the town side budgets are squeezed. So if you look at a 5-year history of positions that have been added to respective budgets, the ratio of the school adds versus these other budgets would be somewhere around 6 to 7 to 1. Specifically, police, fire, and the library have been consistently level funded or close to level funded with regard to positions. So why is this particular position necessary? It's necessary because the fire chief predicts, and I think accurately, increased inspection requirements from the upcoming 40B and 5-story building construction that we have going on in town. And in addition, he predicts, I think accurately, an increased training workload overall, and he could create a training component on the second shift. That said, the fire chief has indicated his willingness to look to recommend this position again during the upcoming fiscal 24 budget process. So I will not be making a motion, but I have 2 requests of the select board, and I'd like the select board to speak to each request. The first is understanding that the select board can't officially commit funds in advance of a fiscal year. Will you make a commitment to make every effort to fund this position in the fiscal 24 budget? And second, will you commit to future budget processes, including fiscal 24, where the townside departments have an equal opportunity to advocate with the warrant committee and an equal success rate for adding critical positions? And you might say, well, they do have an equal opportunity to advocate, but actually they don't. And that's because there's a different hierarchy on the town side. The department heads report to the town administrator, who reports to the select board. So quite often, the select board and the town administrator are doing the advocating, but the town administrator understandably is advocating for a balanced budget. So somehow, and it's obviously going to require the cooperation and collaboration with the schools and perhaps some unpopular political positions taken, but somehow there's got to be more equity and more opportunity there. Thank you. And I'd like to look forward to the select board's comments on those two requests.
Okay, if I may, Mr. Walker, since the select board is going to speak next on Article 20, which is the next article they have under their authority to get back in line with our flow of only speaking under articles, can I defer the question until Article 20, or rather your answer until Article 20? I'd prefer to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think that addresses the points of order people are making. We have not opened number 11 by Mr. Chimney. Ms. Agostino was saying there's no motion. That's why I asked Mr. Walker. He was structuring his point about closing last night's loop in his own way, and I provided him the latitude to do that. With this, we are now off to Article, let me just get my bearings again. We just finished 15. So we are on to 16. Am I correct, team? Thank you. So Article 16, recommended that the town vote to appropriate Community Preservation Act funds as follows. Appropriations from FY23, estimated revenues for committee administrative expenses, $51,400. Historic Resource Reserve, $103,000. Community Housing, $103,000. Open Space and Recreation, $103,000. Estimated revenues for budget reserve, $668,472. This was submitted by the Community Preservation Committee. What I'd like to do is recognize Mr. Rob Lavash, who has a presentation and I believe is the chair of the committee. So, sir, you are recognized. Mr. Lavash, are you there? I think we promoted you to a panelist, Mr. Lavash. Mr. Lavash, you there?
Hello?
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rob Lavash, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I am also the chair of the Community Preservation Committee. I would like to just provide a brief update on our committee's work to date and also our plan ahead for our committee. Go next, please. So our committee is made up of 3 select board appointees, as well as 6 members who are representing town boards and committees, which are the Historical Commission, the Affordable Housing Trust, the Parks Commission, the Conservation Commission, and the Planning Board, as well as the Housing Authority. Next. So just a brief reminder, the CPA is a state law that was passed in 2000 that allows Massachusetts communities to conduct a referendum to add a small surcharge on local property taxes. When combined with matching funds from the statewide Community Preservation Trust Fund, the dedicated fund is used to build and rehabilitate parks, playgrounds, recreational fields, protect open space, support local affordable housing development, and preserve historic buildings and resources. The town of Milton adopted the Community Preservation Act in 2020. Funds will be available in the fiscal year 2023 for CPA projects. Just 5 quick facts about our CPA statewide. 65% of Massachusetts communities have now adopted the CPA. $2.65 billion has been raised. 32,566 acres of open space have been preserved. 3,000 outdoor recreation projects have been funded. 8,700 housing units have been created, with 14,700 housing units supported, and 6,300 historic preservation projects have been preserved. Next. So just walking through a little bit of our timeline. Our committee was formed in last June. We really spent the last summer and fall meeting with town boards and committees to really understand their goals and opportunities for CPA funding. Our first priority for our committee is to create the community preservation plan. And so we have our first draft completed as of spring this year. Last week, our committee met with the public on an open public forum. We are here today at town meeting asking for the appropriation of fiscal year 2023 funds. And then the next process, I just want to mention that there's kind of a two-step application process. The first part, which will open up July 1st, will be an eligibility application. That's kind of a simple application. And that will go till October 1st. So it's kind of a 3-month window. And the next process, which will be the funding application, is another 3-month open process. And that will be kind of end near the end of the year. By September this year, our committee will complete the community preservation plan, which will be the guide for applicants to come to the committee for funding. And then we will come back to town meeting next spring and with a recommendation for projects to be funded. And then approved projects will hopefully be funded by July 2023. Next. So just getting back to the application process, our committee has elected to keep this pretty simple. The eligibility application is kind of a one-pager looking for project descriptions. Our committee will work with all applicants. We'll get back to applicants whether projects can be funded or not. There's things that may be funded, things that can't be funded, and that will be outlined in the plan. And then the next process will go to a funding application, which will open later on, which will open September 1st, and we'll close at the end of the year. And that we're going to be looking for more information, project descriptions, project goals, timelines, more in-depth budgets, as well as looking for town supports, specifically from supports from town boards and committees, as well as Milton residents and outreach to the community. Next. So where we are tonight, I just want to kind of go over what our committee is looking for. A minimum of 10% of the municipality's annual community preservation funds must be spent and allocated in 3 distinct areas. One is community housing, second is historic preservation, and the third category is open space and recreation, kind of coupled in one. So on the pie chart, you'll see on the right, that's kind of 30%. 5% is dedicated to admin costs for our committee, and the rest is kind of in an undesignated bucket of 65%, which can be spent on any of the other 3 categories. So in total, the CPA funds, what we've collected so far, or what we estimate to collect for the year 2022, is around $750,000. And then for fiscal year 2023, what we're asking for appropriation tonight is just roughly over $1 million. The total funds that our committee will have to work with is around $1.75 million. And our committee will determine our yearly budget kind of moving forward after that. That's it, I think. Next. All right, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Levash, and thank you for pronouncing your name so I know how to pronounce it. So thank you. And at this point, I'd like to recognize anyone who wishes to speak to this recommendation. I see Mr. Murphy, Mr. Walker, Mr. Chinman. Mr. Murphy, sorry, I think it's John Murphy, you're recognized. Pardon me? That was a test? I'm sorry. Then I'll thank you for that. We were helping a resident with a technical issue. I'll go to Mr. Walker, then Mr. Chinman, and Mr. Lessing. Mr. Walker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. Just a quick question as to whether, and if this was in an earlier slide, I apologize, but with regard to community housing, is there a definition for that? And is it different from, similar to affordable housing?
No, it's
Mr. Levash, I'll recognize you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, so community housing is just another name for affordable housing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Go to Mr. Chinman and then Mr. Lessing.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Chimman, Precinct 2. The CPA passed. The revenue for it is being collected. This vote won't affect that at all. And as I understand it, there's a minimum of 10% of those funds have to be spent. And this article is proposing it have to be spent in 3 different categories. And this article is proposing to spend 10% of those funds in 3 different categories. So I'm confused what the difference is here between a no vote and a yes vote. I'm hoping someone can explain that, because it looks to me like they may be the same outcome.
Okay. With that, Mr. Levash, could you answer the member's question?
But I don't understand the question.
Okay, Mr. Chimman, could you try to elaborate a little bit?
The CPA law, as I understand it, requires 10% of the revenue collected to be spent on 3 different categories. And this article is proposing to spend 10% on those 3 different categories. And it also authorizes 5% to be spent on administrative costs. And this article is proposing to spend 5% on the administrative cost. So it's clear what happens if we vote yes. If we vote no, is the exact same thing happen because the CPA law requires that?
What are the implications of a no vote? Here is your specific question. Or your general question, like, do we have to spend it anyways? Are we out of compliance with the law? That's what you're getting at.
Pete, Mr. Moderator, can Pete Jackson speak to this?
Mr. Jackson is a citizen. Is he also? I didn't.
No, he's also.
He's also a member of your committee?
Yes, he is.
I see. Okay. By the way, Mr. Jackson, on an unrelated matter, did verify that he is a registered voter, asked for permission to speak at town meeting. So yes, Mr. Jackson, if you can answer this question, that would be helpful. If we can recognize Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me?
You're unmuted. You should be able to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The act requires that the committee's budgets be voted by town meeting. So if you don't pass this budget, we don't have the ability to use the money. Town meeting has to pass our budget each year.
Understood. And if they don't, what happens to the money that's being collected? I think that's what also Mr. Chimman is getting at.
You would have to wait till next year.
It would sit in some reserve and wait till future town meeting approval.
Correct.
Understood. Mr. Chimman, I see you're unmuted. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Next, I have Mr. Lessing. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you. Andres Lessing, Precinct 8. I wanted to commend Mr. Levash and the whole Community Preservation Committee for creating this work. I know it's been a long time coming, and I also understand this to just be creating the reserve so we can spend the money. So I rise in favor of this article. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you. I see no other hands. So with that, I'll proceed to a vote. This just requires a majority vote. So we will put up the poll. Mr. Levash, we're going to move you back to the attendee pool so you can vote. That'll take a second. When everyone is moved back, we'll put up the poll. Okay, all those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by saying yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. On the phone in favor, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed on the phone, no. Okay, we can mute the lines. Okay, we can close the poll. With that, the recommendation carries with 184 yes votes at 89%, 21 no votes at 10%, and 1 abstention at 0%. Thank you for Article 16. Next, we will move to Article 17. Article 17 recommended that the town vote to increase the size of the Master Plan Implementation Committee from 5 to 7 members. I'm going to start I don't think, Mr. Doyle, did you have any introductory comments on this or just wait for questions?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, if I may, Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Member of Precinct 7.
Thank you.
Noting that the recommendation before town meeting was approved by both the Planning Board and the Select Board, may I ask that the Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, Cheryl Tagias, be recognized to speak to the article.
Yes, sir. Mr. Tagias, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Doyle, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Tagias, Precinct 9 member and Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I would like to expand on the comment that's contained in the warrant, which is accurate. The master plan was approved by the Planning Board on June 25th, 2015, after a 2-year public process and $125,000 public investment. It recognizes what residents value and wish to preserve, but importantly also recognizes areas that need improvement. It acknowledges that it is better to plan for change than to not, recognizing that change will come and needs of residents evolve over time. The implementation plan is the core of the master plan. It is organized around goals and objectives, and it identifies 121 strategies and action steps needed to achieve those goals. It is the how to get from where the town was at that time to where it wants to go in the future. Multiple town departments, boards, and committees are responsible for the implementation of those strategies. Expanding the committee from 5 members to 7 will allow for increased diversity and for the committee to fully realize its charge of monitoring progress and recommending actions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation? I see Mr. Mullen and no other hands. Mr. Mullen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Peter Mullen, Town Meeting Member Precinct 2. As I understand it, the article before us would expand the committee by adding 2 more members. And the question I have is whether we need to also indicate how those 2 members will be appointed. I don't know who appointed the other public members, whether it's jointly the Planning Board and the Selectmen, but I think we need to indicate how the new members will be appointed.
Is that in the form of a question of who appoints the committee?
What does the Select Board and the Planning Board anticipate the process will be to appoint these 2?
Thank you. Understood. I'll start with Mr. Doyle of the Select Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. One moment, please, if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We just wanted to confirm an earlier article establishing the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Under that earlier article, members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee are appointed jointly by the Planning Board and by the Select Board.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen, I see you're unmuted. Does that answer your question?
Not really. I think it's vague as to my understanding of the former article is that it provided for some members of the public to be appointed to the committee. It also required that at least 1 member be from the Planning Board and I believe 1 from the Select Board. I think the article would be improved if it said increase from 5 to 7 with 2 new public members appointed jointly by the Planning Board and the Select Board. And I'd offer that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, so let me get the language exactly right. I am not an attorney. I know you are. So if I take the sentence that ends with 7 in parentheses members, would you say joint 7 members of the public?
7 members.
Pardon me?
I believe we could say vote to increase the size of the Master Plan Implementation Committee from 5 to 7 members, comma, with the 2 additional members to be members of the public appointed jointly by the planning board and the select board.
I'm just capturing that. I'll read that back. So replace the period at the end of the sentence with a comma and says, with 2 additional members of the public appointed jointly by the planning board and the select board, period.
I believe that should work.
Very good. Okay, that's offered as a friendly amendment at the moment, so I appreciate the member seconding. We'll see if we need the second. That was Ms. Lee was seconding if we need it. I will then, I'd ask on the microphone, the planning board and the select board to consider that. Meanwhile, recognize Ms. Tagayas, the chair of the Master Implementation Planning Committee. Ms. Tagayas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have opened what was Article 13 of the October 2014 town meeting, which established this committee. And I'll read one paragraph from that article, which said committee shall consist of 5 members to be appointed jointly by the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen for terms that are renewed annually. 1 member shall be a member of the Planning Board or its designee, and a second member shall be a member of the Board of Selectmen or its designee. The other members shall have expertise in planning, architecture, economic development, landscape architecture, real estate, or other relevant fields. So when this article that's before us tonight was discussed, we discussed changing nothing else about the establishment of the committee. There's additional steps, which includes the charge of the committee. So I wonder whether it's necessary to make this modification that's on the table, or whether the original article stands and the only change is the number.
That's a fair question. Why don't we'll do a couple things. Let's see if the select board and planning board accept the friendly. Meanwhile, Mr. Kelly has raised a point of order. Could we, Mr. Kelly, could we unmute you? Mr. Kelly, you there? Have we unmuted Mr. Kelly? Yes, Mr. Kelly, you have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself, Mr. Kelly, to speak.
Yeah, I'll withdraw it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Meanwhile, while we're waiting for the boards, Ms. Agostino has raised her hand. You're recognized, ma'am.
Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9. I also reference back to the Article 13 that established the Master Plan Implementation Committee and was just trying to locate it's regulated and established under Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 81D. And I'm wondering if the submission should have just taken the Article 13 and amended it. So that's kind of a technical question as to how we're making this change. And I will also, so that's referencing what you're currently discussing. And I believe this also may tie in. I would request, so it is the select board and the planning board together, according to the Mass General Law. I would request that the select board and the planning board seriously consider potentially appointing one of the members of the Commission on Disability. Milton has many disabled residents, and any master plan would be very prudent to understand how we can make everything, or as much as everything that we have in Milton, accessible to all. So that's an additional point I'll make at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. You'll pardon me, I will go check on our committees. Thank you. Both the select board and the planning board have their opinions. Then we'll go to the warrant committee for theirs. So I'll start with Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With one recommended addition, the select board does not feel the amendment is inconsistent with Article 13 of October 2014 that established a master plan implementation committee for the town of Milton. We would ask that there be agreement to insert after the comma the word "the," so that the second line would read members, comma. What? No, we don't want to do that.
Once you say,
just change it. Okay, you got it. It's done. Thank you. You're ahead of us.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. I'll now go to Ms. Hall of the Planning Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The planning board recognizes that there is not a conflict with this, but the question would be, if we are going to add this language, should we add the remaining language, which refers to the qualifications? So we really have no strong opinion on this, and would just defer to town council to see if by adding the two members, if we should include the additional language that is the qualifications of those additional two members.
Understood. So you are unopposed and defer to town council on language.
That is correct.
Right? Okay. Thank you. I did speak to town council just a moment ago. Perhaps just to clarify, town council, would you mind unmuting and just describe precedents for this and the appropriateness of expanding a standing committee? So I recognize Mr. Kevin Freitag. Is Mr. Freitag in the panelist pool? Mr. Freitag, I see you unmuted.
That's Mr. Moderator. Kevin Freitag from the Office of Town Council. I believe that the recommendation is in proper form. If there's a specific question that I can respond to regarding some piece of it, I'll do that, but it appears to me to be in good form as is.
I think one of the other points I did here, and as is there, for example, as the moderator, I'll try to answer this question as well. We have precedents for this. For example, the Fire Station Building Committee was initially formed by an article of town meeting. In a subsequent town meeting, the membership was expanded just by adding an article that expanded the membership of the committee and specified the source of the new members, just as Mr. Mullins' friendly amendment has. So at that point, with the town councils weighing in, sounds like planning board is unopposed. Select board is supportive with their point. I'll go to the chair of the warrant committee, Mr. Asher. Mr. Asher, you're recognized for your opinion, because this is your recommendation after all.
George Asher, Chair Warrant Committee, Town Meeting Member Precinct 6. The Warrant Committee recommends approval to the town meeting of this amendment.
Okay, so the language has now been amended as you see it on your screens. With that, we'll now see if there's any discussion, any further discussion on this recommendation as it's amended on your screen. I'll look for any hands. If not, we'll go to a vote. I see no hands. With that, this just requires a majority vote. If we can put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion before the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we can unmute the phones. They are unmuted. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
no. Thank you. Opposed, no. Thank you. We can mute the phones. Okay, we can close the poll. The motion carries with 189 yeses at 91%, 17 noes at 8%, and 2 abstentions at 1%. Thank you. We will, by the way, Article 18 was covered under the consent agenda. Article 19 was covered under the consent agenda. That takes us to Article 20. We have 15 minutes. I think we can probably get in one more before we break. I'll just summarize. Recommended that the town appropriate $8,180,202 for the sewer enterprise fund. That's $633,580 be included in the appropriation from the general fund for indirect costs and be allocated to the sewer enterprise fund for funding. That $8,813,782 be raised and appropriated as follows. Sewer enterprise revenue total $8,813,782. Subtotal direct cost of sewer enterprise costs $8,180,202. Total indirect costs $633,580. Total $8,813,782. This was submitted by the select board. I'd like to start by recognizing Mr. Doyle, who then wants to recognize Mr. Berkeley. Mr. Doyle, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. May I ask that Director of Public Works Chase Berkeley be recognized to speak to this article?
Thank you, Mr. Berkeley. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chase Berkeley, Director of Public Works. This article is very similar to the previous years with respect to the increases. So when it comes to the sewer enterprise fund, 3/4 of our expenses relate to the MWRA assessment. We saw a 3.8% increase in sewer assessment from FY22 to 23. So that carries forward into our budget. Outside of that, everything is essentially status quo from the previous year.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak to this recommendation? I see no hands raised. With that, this just requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion for the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. We can unmute the phones. It looks like our phones are gone. No, they're not. Sorry.
Nope, still here. You didn't ask.
I was taking a cue from my team. 10:15. So the phones are unmuted, sir. How do you say on this article?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. 2 yeses. Opposed on the phone? Please say no. Thank you. We can mute the phones. Okay. Okay, we can close the poll and display the results. The motion carries yeses 191 at 95%, no 7 at 4%, and abstain 2 at 1%. We'll now proceed to Article 21, which is on page 32 of your warrant. Recommended that the town vote to rescind Article 17 of the May 3rd, 2021 FY22 town meeting and vote to appropriate the sum of $920,066 for the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, that $86,500 be included in appropriations from the general fund for indirect costs and be allocated to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund for funding, and that $1,006,566 be raised and appropriated as follows. Total revenue, $1,006,566. Total subdirect direct cost, $920,066. Indirects, $86,500. Total $1,006,566. Submitted by the select board. Again, I would like to recognize Mr. Doyle, the select board, who wants to recognize Mr. Berkeley. Mr. Doyle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7. And also, depending upon how many additional articles that are in the Department of Public Works, request that Mr. Berkeley be recognized for them too. There would be Article 23, 24, and 25 in addition to this Article 21. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. By the way, there's been a motion to adjourn, which can't be made during a discussion like this. So at the conclusion of this, if we could just then bring up the motion to adjourn, which we typically do at 10:30. Thank you, Mr. Berkeley. You're recognized. And Mr. Doyle, I'm going to come back to you and Mr. Walker's 2 questions at the conclusion of Mr. Berkeley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chase Berkeley again. Yes, so this article is necessary to reduce the FY22, so the current year appropriation, by $50,000, which is the retained earnings amount, because there was, at the time the article was appropriated at the May 2021 meeting, the retained earnings had not been certified by the Department of Revenue. So we're not allowed to appropriate that. So this reduction will take the form of a reducing expenses line, which we were able to anticipate during the year in talks with the town accountant and the Department of Revenue. And we have adjusted our operating plan going forward to absorb that decrease.
Thank you. Mr. Doyle, perhaps if you have a moment to answer Mr. Walker's question from a few moments ago.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, with respect to the first question put forward by Mr. Walker, to make every effort to make a commitment to consideration, the Select Board will indeed make every effort to put forward for funding the position requested and being advocated. With respect to the second question, as it is understood, it addressed future advocation with the Warrant Committee. Our understanding is that that is standard operating procedure, longstanding in the town of Milton. And in addition to that, the department heads have the opportunity to come before the Select Board Finance Subcommittee. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, I see your hand is raised. You're recognized, sir.
Just one quick follow-up. Thank you, Chair Doyle, for those responses. On the second point, I think we have to look at the results. That's what I'm focused on. And with regard to the results, there's not anywhere near equity in terms of how many positions the library, police, and fire have been able to add over the last few years. We could go back 5 years, we could go back 10. I'm happy to provide you with that information, but we're not even close to equity. So what I'm requesting is that, and as I said, this will require some cooperation and collaboration with the schools, because that's where most of the cost is. But to get closer to equity and and I'm only talking about critical positions such as this one, but we've got to do more to allow those departments to add critical positions when they believe it's necessary. And the results right now underscore that we're not there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I think that doesn't require a reply from Mr. Doyle. So with that, pardon me, Mr. Walker?
No, it does not. No,
it does not. Thank you. Very good. I see no other, I see actually one hand raised on this article. Mr. Robert Powers, you're recognized.
Robert Powers, Precinct 2. My question's on the retained earnings. So last year, I noticed it too with the capital projects article where there was an error in the free cash calculation. Is anything being done in regards to making sure that it's done on time, that these are submitted on time? Traditionally in the late fall, early winter time. I don't know if it's towards a question really towards the town accountant, the town administrator, or the Select Board as a whole. But is there going to be a plan put in place to make sure that this is done on time going forward?
I want to make sure your question is specific, that specifically what is done on time in relation to retained earnings.
So that it's submitted to the DOR, DLS for approval, the free cash and retained earnings.
Okay, the two items here, the free cash,
free cash and retained earnings are basically the same thing, just this is an enterprise.
Okay. I think I understand your question. So in the stormwater enterprise, you want to make sure that the retained earnings row of...
My question is, what's the delay? Why is it taking so long to get them certified by the DOR? Because the same issue happened this year with the capital projects and the free cash.
Is that specific to this? I'm just trying to make sure I understand your question because I don't yet. Specific to this article and the stormwater, or more broadly?
It's more broad, but with the retained earnings issue that is brought up in this article. So it seems like there's an issue the last 2 years where, our free cash submission maybe is late. Is that's what it appears? so that the DOR isn't certifying it, until this late in the year.
Okay, so it sounds like you're asking about a broader question of certifying free cash.
Retained earnings in an enterprise fund would be part of that same submission, yes.
Okay, why don't I ask the select board as a submitting authority and see if they have an accounting answer to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Arthur Doyle, Select Board, Precinct 7 member. It's a fair question, and the response is that there was a personnel transition in the town with the movement of the director of accounting to another department, and the engagement of a consultant before such time as we had a director of finance brought in to the town. So that gap led to a couple of instances that are not habitual, not characteristic, and not intended to continue into the future. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We hope that is responsive.
Mr. Powers, I think you're unmuted. Did that answer your question?
In a way, yes. That does explain it. My concern would be that I know there's another transition happening now. Do you anticipate that there will be a problem next year with this transition? That's, I guess, directed at the chairman of the select board.
Yes, I think it is. Mr. Doyle, perhaps you can answer the transition underway and how it might affect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. The position has been posted. Staff are working diligently to make sure that we can have a person in place, and that in the meantime, that the accounting department is working assiduously to make sure that everything is as it should be. We recognized what happened in the past transition, and we are doing everything to make sure that it is not repeated in this transition.
Thank you, Mr. Powers and Mr. Dennehy. I'll now pardon me, Mr. Doyle, because I see Mr. Dennehy. I'll recognize you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Dennehy, town meeting member, Precinct 8, and former town administrator. So to the gentleman's town meeting member's question, there was some delay also at the Department of Revenue Division of Local Services this year as well. And in an attempt to make sure that we got this stuff correct, the former finance director continued to work with our representative at DOR DLS. There were certain times in early winter when we thought we had this ironed out, and we were told that it was going to be a couple more weeks. So there were some extenuating circumstances regarding this year's filing. I can't answer the question going forward, but just I think there's some validity to the fact that the Department of Revenue and DLS also faced some hurdles this year due to COVID, understanding that American Rescue Plan Act funding was also being filed, as well as closing out the books for our CARES Act money as well. So there was a lot of activity going on, filing for federal grant funding that also took place. So thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands raised. So with that, we'll proceed to the vote. This just requires a majority vote. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of the motion for the body, please signify by voting yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we could unmute the phones and let me know when they're unmuted. On the phones, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
Thank you. You mute the phones. Okay, we can put up the results. The motion carries with 190 yeses at 96%, 5 noes at 3%, and 2 abstains at 1%. Folks, we are now approaching 10:30. Before we take on another one, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn until Thursday night, June 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yes, I see Ms. Agostino so moved. Is there a second? There's a second by Mr. Matthews. If we could put up the poll. All those in favor of adjourning until June 9, please signify by saying yes. All opposed, please vote no. All abstaining, please vote abstain. If we can unmute the phones. They're unmuted on the phones. In favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
Let's count 2 ayes. Thank you. Votes are still coming in. And the results, motion carries with 180 yeses at 92%, 11 noes at 6%, and 4 abstains at 2%. Thank you very much, folks. We are adjourned until Thursday night.